In 1886, in the busy industrial city of Manchester, England, doctors at the Royal Hospital uncovered something that shocked them for decades. In the dark, damp basement of the hospital, they stumbled upon a hidden laboratory that looked like it belonged in a nightmare. Inside were glass jars holding preserved human organs, handwritten journals filled with anatomical notes far beyond the knowledge of that era, and at the center, surgical tools made for a child. The shocking part was that the person behind this disturbing collection was only 12 years old. His name was Edmund Blackwood, a boy who turned death into his obsession. What his experiments revealed not only challenged medicine at the time, but also questioned the very nature of reality. For more than a century, the British Medical Archives tried to hide his story. To understand how unusual Edmund's work was, it's important to know the world of Victorian England in the 1880s. Industry was booming, but medicine was still developing. Louis Pasteur's germ theory was just starting to gain acceptance. Doctors still didn't fully grasp sterilization, and anesthesia was rarely used because of the risks. Manchester was a center of industry, filled with factories but also disease and high child death rates. In the poorer areas, people rarely lived beyond 35 years. It was in this environment that Edmund was born in March 1874, the son of a wealthy textile merchant. His mother died giving birth to him, a loss that left a deep mark on his life. From a very young age, Edmund showed signs of brilliance. By the age of 4, he was already reading medical books in his father's library. At 6, he could recite anatomical works in Latin. Yet his intelligence came with something unsettling. Servants later recalled that he spent hours studying dead animals in the garden, not with curiosity like other children, but with the precision of a scientist. The first real evidence of his experiments appeared in the winter of 1884, when he was just 10. The family gardener, Thomas Whitmore, discovered an improvised operating table in an old barn. On it were basic surgical tools and the remains of small animals, cats, rabbits, and birds. They had been dissected with extreme precision, their organs carefully removed and stored in jars with neat labels written by Edmund. Next to them was a diary filled with detailed scientific notes far beyond the understanding of most professionals at that time. He described decomposition, chemical effects on tissue, and preservation methods with incredible accuracy. When his parents confronted him, Edmund showed no shame. Calmly, he explained that he was studying what he called the mechanisms of vital transition, a phrase he invented himself. Concerned, his father called their family doctor Aldrich Petton. In notes discovered years later, Dr. Petton described Edmund as a brilliant mind trapped in a child's body, but with an unhealthy interest in death. Most troubling was Edmund's theory of vital energy. He believed a measurable force left the body at the moment of death, and that it could be captured and studied. Instead of seeking psychological help, Dr. Petton made a critical mistake. He encouraged a boy's curiosity. He gave Edmund advanced medical books and even allowed him to observe his consultations. By April 1886, Petton had secured Edmund a scholarship at Manchester Royal Hospital. Officially, the boy was just a junior research assistant, but in reality, he had access to the labs and even the morgue. At first, he impressed the doctors with his knowledge and questions during autopsies, often knowing more than medical students. But soon, troubling signs appeared. Nurse Margaret Thornfield wrote in a letter that Edmund spent long hours alone in the morgue after hours. When asked about it, he simply said he was making extra observations. The night janitor, James McKinnon, also reported seeing faint lights in the basement late at night, along with sounds that reminded him of surgical tools and quiet voices. Everything came to a head in September 1886. Dr. Harrison Blackthorne, head of pathology, arrived at the hospital early one morning and decided to visit the basement laboratory. What he found that day would change his life forever. The laboratory had been completely reshaped under Edmund's hand. Surgical tables were arranged in precise, almost ritual-like order. Shelves and tables held dozens of jars containing preserved organs and fluids that gave off a strange, glowing light. The walls were covered with complex diagrams linking different stages of death and decay. These weren't just normal medical drawings. Many included unusual symbols and notes that seemed to mix science with something beyond it. At the center of the room stood the most unsettling find, a machine Edmund had built, which he named the Vital Essence Captor. It was a strange mix of Victorian medical devices and alchemical-style parts. The setup included glass tubes, crude electrodes, and a modified surgical table. According to his notes, Edmund believed the device could detect and capture the energy leaving the body at the moment of death. The discovery grew darker when Dr. Blackthorne realized Edmund had already tested the machine. Records showed that at least 7 bodies from the hospital morgue had been used in his experiments. These were not ordinary autopsies. Edmund had connected the corpses to his device and carefully documented the results. His diary claimed the machine worked exactly as he had imagined. The confiscated papers revealed even more. Edmund's writings described each experiment with a calm, methodical tone, as if he were a trained researcher. He combined autopsy techniques with his own unusual methods, going far beyond the science of his time. His early work focused on studying how tissue broke down after death. Using a microscope he had modified himself, he observed and recorded changes in cells every 15 minutes during the first day after death. What he was truly searching for, though, was what he called a transition window, a short period when he believed the body still held its vital essence. The most controversial experiments involved his device. Edmund believed human consciousness produced a type of measurable electrical energy that lingered briefly after death. To test this, he placed electrodes on bodies and used a modified galvanometer to measure changes in conductivity. His notes suggested the results were consistent and repeatable. But he went further. His records showed patterns in the readings, as if the energy was organized rather than random. One diary entry dated August 15, 1886, described a conclusion. The essence doesn't fade without order. There is a structure, a sign of communication. Consciousness tries to remain intact even after the body fails. Page after page contained sequences of numbers and symbols, which Edmund claimed were translations of this energy. He even wrote that they revealed details about each person's final moments of awareness. In his mind, he had found a way to speak with the dead. The night of September 23rd, 1886, marked the peak of his work and the beginning of his disappearance. Records show Edmund had requested special permission to continue his research overnight. Dr. Petton, still convinced he was guiding a young genius, agreed. Edmund prepared his most advanced version of the Vital Essence Captor, built on weeks of refinements. At 11:47 p.m., janitor James McKinnon passed through the hospital corridors. He later reported seeing bright lights coming from the basement and hearing a strange electrical hum, almost like music. Curious but cautious, he chose not to enter, assuming the boy was conducting another experiment. That was the last confirmed sighting of Edmund Blackwood. The following morning, Dr. Blackthorne arrived early and found the laboratory door locked from the inside. A locksmith was called to open it. What they found was chaos. Tables were overturned, jars smashed, and equipment scattered. The Vital Essence Captor was destroyed, shattered as though it had exploded from within. But of Edmund there was no trace. The search began inside the hospital. The search for Edmund went on for days. Every room, hallway, and storage space in the hospital was checked, but there was no trace of him. 3 days later, investigators found something chilling among the wreckage of the laboratory, his diary. The final entry, written on September 23rd at 11:30 p.m., looked nothing like his usual neat handwriting. The words were frantic and rushed. The device worked beyond what I expected. The barrier is thinner than I thought. They are trying to reach me. Not just echoes. There's awareness, intention. They know I'm here. They want to return. The essence isn't just energy. It's hunger, a hunger for life. I've made a terrible mistake. I open a door that must stay closed. The air is freezing. The lights are failing. If anyone find this, destroy everything. Burn the notes. Don't let others repeat this. Death is not the end. It is a prison, and I gave the prisoners a key. This was Edmund Blackwood's last known message. After his disappearance, Manchester Royal Hospital began experiencing unexplained events. Nurses reported sudden drops in temperature. Patients claimed to hear whispers in the corridors at night. Equipment failed for no clear reason. Dr. Blackthorne, who had once dismissed such stories, changed his mind after a personal encounter. A week after Edmund vanished, he wrote in his memoirs that he heard familiar footsteps outside his office. He recognized them instantly as Edmund's. When he opened the door, the hallway was empty, but the temperature had plummeted. The sound had come from below, from the sealed basement. Other staff began reporting similar incidents. Nurse Margaret Thornfield swore. She saw Edmund's figure in the windows of the locked laboratory. Janitor James McKinnon said equipment was mysteriously moved and broken during the night. Faced with growing fear, the hospital administration made a drastic choice. In October 1886, less than a month after the disappearance, the basement laboratory was permanently sealed. Walls were built over the entrance, windows welded shut, and even the ventilation system filled with concrete. Officially, it was called a renovation. In reality, they were trying to contain something they didn't understand. But the strange events only increased. Patients began reporting vivid dreams of a Victorian boy asking them questions, always about illness, fear, and death. These were the same questions Edmund had asked during his research. Even more unsettling, some patients with no education described complex surgical procedures and medical theories they should not have known. It seemed as though Edmund was continuing his studies through the dreams of the living. The hospital finally closed in 1923, with officials citing aging facilities and the need for modernization. The truth, however, was different. Over the 37 years after Edmund's disappearance, the unexplained activity became unbearable. In 1892, 6 years after the events, Dr. Petton, the mentor who had first encouraged Edmund, suffered mental collapse and was committed to a psychiatric hospital. Decades later, in 1967, a collection of his hidden letters was discovered. In them, Petton admitted he had secretly tried to recreate Edmund's device. Convinced the boy had uncovered something extraordinary, he built his own version of the vital essence captor. "I succeeded," Petton wrote. "On the first attempt, I heard his voice. Edmund was there, but he was no longer the child I knew. He was hungry, twisted by what he had learned. He begged me to use the device on a living person at the moment of death, claiming it would let him return. But I realized he didn't plan to return alone. Others were with him, shadows, hungry and waiting." Petton ended his letters with final confession. "I destroyed everything, the notes, the machine. But it's too late. The door cannot be closed. They know about us now. Edmund was only the beginning. There will be more." 3 days after writing this, Dr. Petton was found dead in his cell. The official cause was heart failure, yet the medical report noted details that defied explanation. His body showed signs of decay far too advanced for the short time since his death, and his body temperature was far lower than normal, as if he had been gone much longer than the evidence allowed. Strange events at Manchester Royal Hospital continued for decades. In 1908, a mysterious fire broke out, destroying an entire wing of the building, the one located directly above Edmund's sealed laboratory. Investigators never found a cause. In 1915, during the First World War, the hospital was converted to treat wounded soldiers. Doctors noticed unusually high cases of war neurosis. Many soldiers reported seeing a ghostly boy who questioned them about their encounters with death. Over a century later, in 1987, demolition crews preparing the site for redevelopment uncovered something unexpected. Behind the thick walls sealed in 1886, Edmund's laboratory had remained untouched. The archaeology team called to investigate was led by Dr. Sarah Whitmore, the great-granddaughter of Thomas Whitmore, the gardener who had first discovered Edmund's experiments. What they found shocked everyone. The laboratory looked almost frozen in time, preserved far better than expected, as if decades had barely touched it. At the center stood the remains of Edmund's vital essence captor, but alongside it were new pieces of equipment that clearly didn't belong to the 19th century. Some parts appear to come from early radios and vacuum tubes, technology only developed in the 20th century. Copper wiring was arranged in intricate patterns across the room. Even more disturbing were the piles of documents scattered across the space. The handwriting matched Edmund's perfectly, but the letters were dated long after his disappearance. In 1901, 1923, 1955, and even as late as 1978. These writings suggested that Edmund, or something claiming to be him, had continued his work throughout the century. The letters described new insights into what he called the intermediate realm, and they detailed increasingly advanced methods of communication. One letter from 1965 contained precise instructions for building an updated version of the Vital Essence captor using modern electronics. It ended with a chilling statement. The experiments will continue. Death is only the beginning of true research. Those with open minds will find me. I will be waiting. The 1987 discovery sparked fierce debate among historians, researchers, and skeptics. The most conventional explanation claimed Edmund was simply a troubled prodigy who suffered a breakdown, hid in the hospital, and eventually died, while later letters were forged by someone imitating his style. But this theory could not explain how advanced technologies from later decades ended up sealed in the laboratory, or how someone could have accessed it for nearly a century. A second theory, favored by paranormal researchers, argued that Edmund had achieved exactly what he sought, transcendence beyond physical death. They suggested he existed as a consciousness trapped between life and death, continuing his experiments in ways that matched the many sightings and reports linked to him throughout the 20th century. If Edmund truly managed to hold on to his consciousness after death, he would have had decades to refine his theories. But Dr. Sarah Whitmore proposed an even more unsettling idea. After years of studying the case, she suggested Edmund didn't just survive death, he broke it. According to her, his experiments may have torn a hole in the boundary between life and death, allowing the dead to influence the living world. Edmund wasn't only a participant in this process, he was the one who engineered it, using the rupture to carry out experiments far beyond anything imagined in his time. This would explain why sightings of him were not confined to Manchester Royal Hospital. Throughout the 20th century, researchers around the world reported strange encounters in laboratories and hospitals. The stories were strikingly similar. A Victorian boy appeared to those studying death, near-death experiences, or consciousness. He offered advanced knowledge, asking in return for help continuing his work. Some scientists admitted they accepted his offer. They spoke of results that were groundbreaking and terrifying. One reported effect was something they called consciousness bleeding, where researchers began experiencing thoughts and memories of the dead. Dr. Michael Harrison of Boston University, one of the few willing to speak publicly, explained, "Edmund showed me techniques to detect brain activity after death. The science was extraordinary, but the price was unbearable. I began hearing voices of patients who had already passed. I had to stop before I lost my mind." In 2019, the case resurfaced after a chilling incident at Tokyo General Hospital. Security footage captured a figure matching Edmund's description walking through the corridors at 3 a.m., heading toward the neurology lab. The next morning, researchers discovered their equipment had been altered and filled with files containing data on consciousness studies far more advanced than anything known at the time. Leaked footage showed the figure was faintly translucent, moving with an unnatural, fluid motion. Now, more than 130 years after his first experiments, Edmund Blackwood remains a mystery. Reports of his presence continue to emerge in research centers around the world, always in places focused on death and consciousness. Some believe he has become something beyond human understanding, a mind that exists between worlds, pushing his experiments on a global scale. Others claim he never truly died at all, but found a way to exist in multiple realities at once. What is certain is this. In 1886, Edmund Blackwood opened a door that has never been closed. His obsession with understanding death transformed him into something neither fully alive nor fully gone. The boy who studied death as if it were science may have turned death itself into his laboratory. And if the stories are true, his research continues, waiting for the next curious mind willing to help him finish what he started. The story of Edmund Blackwood does not simply belong to the dusty archives of Victorian Manchester. It has persisted, resurfacing in whispered accounts, sealed letters, classified files, and chilling personal testimonies. Each generation has inherited fragments of his work, and each discovery has added to the growing unease that his experiments never truly ended. To speak of Edmund is not merely to recall a boy genius lost to time. It is to acknowledge the possibility that his pursuit of forbidden knowledge may still be shaping the world we live in. Edmund's diary and devices were never just the eccentricities of a precocious child. They represented a methodical, calculated attempt to map the boundary between life and death. What began as clinical observation soon became something more ambitious: the belief that consciousness itself could be measured, preserved, and ultimately contacted. His final entries reveal the magnitude of what he thought he had achieved, a crack in the barrier that separates existence from oblivion. Whether one views this as madness, metaphor, or genuine discovery, the evidence suggests Edmund did succeed in creating a rupture, and the consequences have echoed for over a century. Dr. Sarah Whitmore's interpretation reframed Edmund not as a victim of his own obsession, but as its architect. Her theory, that Edmund's experiments fracture the natural order, offers a grim lens through which to view the countless unexplained phenomena tied to him. If death is indeed a prison, as Edmund wrote in his last words, then his device was not just a key but crowbar, forcing the door wide open for others to slip through. From Manchester to Tokyo, from the trenches of World War I to sterile modern neurology labs, reports of Edmund's appearance follow a consistent thread. He arrives not as a wandering ghost, but as an active collaborator, offering knowledge and demanding cooperation. This is no passive haunting. It is targeted intervention, specifically directed at those who study death, consciousness, or the boundary between them. The consistency of these encounters across cultures and eras lends a disturbing credibility. Soldiers in 1915 describing a Victorian boy asking questions about their brush with mortality cannot easily be dismissed as coincidence. Researchers in Boston or Berlin, separated by decades, recounting identical experiences of consciousness bleeding, are harder still to explain away. The persistence of the figure, unchanged in appearance for over 130 years, challenges both rational skepticism and paranormal explanation. If Edmund's consciousness endures, it has not simply lingered, it has evolved. Those who claim to have worked with Edmund speak of breakthroughs that defy belief: methods of detecting brain activity after death, techniques for mapping patterns of consciousness, and theoretical frameworks for understanding the intermediate realm. Yet alongside these achievements come profound psychological costs. The minds of those who engage with him often fractured under the weight of what they experienced. Voices of the dead intruded into waking hours. Dreams became indistinguishable from memories. Some researchers abandoned their work entirely, while others vanished from public record. The tragedy of Edmund Blackwood is not only his own transformation, but the way his influence seems to consume those who dare to follow his path. Knowledge, when offered by him, arrives bound to something darker, an erosion of sanity, a distortion of perception, and the gnawing sense that humanity was never meant to look so closely at what lies beyond. Perhaps the most tangible evidence of Edmund's persistence came in 2019 at Tokyo General Hospital. Unlike personal testimonies, here we had machines watching, recording, and archiving. Security footage showed a translucent figure walking corridors that had been empty moments before. Equipment was later discovered to have been tampered with, not destroyed but improved. Files appeared on computers without human input, files containing research decades ahead of current science. Authorities classified the event, but leaks ensured the footage reached the public. Debate raged between skeptics, who called it a hoax, and believers, who argued this was proof that Edmund's work had entered a modern era. More importantly, the event confirmed what researchers had whispered for years. His experiments had not ended in the 19th century. They were ongoing, global, and accelerating. What then did Edmund become? The theories diverge, but they share one common point. He is no longer just a boy lost to a Victorian laboratory accident. Some argue he transcended death itself, existing as a consciousness independent of a body. Others believe he never died, but learned to inhabit multiple dimensions simultaneously, flickering between them like a scientist walking from one lab to another. Whitmore's theory remains the most terrifying, that he broke death, creating a permanent breach through which the dead can reach into our world. In this view, Edmund is less an individual and more a custodian of a rupture, an ongoing experiment in which all humanity has unwillingly become participants. None of these explanations offer comfort. All suggest that what Edmund started has altered the relationship between life and death in ways we do not yet understand. What unsettles historians and scientists alike is not just what is known, but what remains hidden. How many encounters were never reported out of fear of ridicule? How many breakthroughs in medical research carry within them traces of knowledge whispered by a boy who should not exist. How many lives have been touched, damaged, or consumed by this legacy without ever realizing its source? The sealing of the Manchester Laboratory in 1886 was intended to close the matter forever, yet the rediscovery in 1987 showed how futile that attempt was. Knowledge, once unleashed, cannot be buried under concrete. Letters dated decades after Edmund's disappearance prove that the story did not end in Manchester. It spread quietly, invisibly, attaching itself to the very places where human beings dare to question the mysteries of death. Perhaps the most haunting idea is Edmund's own, that death itself is not an ending but a field of study. He approached mortality not with fear but with curiosity, and in doing so, redefined it as a laboratory without limits. If his consciousness persists, it may well be because he found a way to transform himself into both researcher and experiment. For the rest of us, the implications are grim. If death is a laboratory, then we are all potential subjects. Every passing life becomes another data point. Every dying breath might feed into experiments still being conducted beyond our perception. In Edmund's view, the distinction between living and dead was not sacred. It was procedural. One step in a process, measured, recorded, and ultimately manipulated. Edmund's final written words remain the most haunting. Death is not the end. It is a prison, and I gave the keys to the prisoners. Whether literal or symbolic, this statement resonates with everything that followed. If he indeed created a breach, then what has emerged from that breach is not knowledge alone but hunger, a desire for continuation, expression, and perhaps escape. Those who worked with him spoke of voices, shadows, and presences that accompanied the revelations. Petton's letters describe Edmund no longer as a brilliant child, but as something transformed, surrounded by entities eager to cross over. To accept Edmund's assistance may be to open oneself not to wisdom, but to possession. Today, the case of Edmund Blackwood sits at the intersection of history, folklore, science, and the paranormal. It challenges the categories we use to make sense of the world. Was he a prodigy whose brilliance slipped into delusion? Or was he a pioneer who stumbled into truths humanity was not ready to face? Reports of his appearances continue. Laboratories investigating near-death experiences or consciousness anomalies still whisper of unexplained phenomena. Files appear where they should not exist. Researchers claim breakthroughs they cannot fully explain. Skeptics dismiss these as fabrications. But the consistency and persistence of the accounts make dismissal harder with each passing decade. If Edmund is still out there, whether as spirit, consciousness, or something more, it raises a question we are not prepared to answer. Is humanity benefiting from his discoveries, or are we merely fueling an experiment we cannot control? More than 130 years have passed since a boy genius in Victorian Manchester set out to measure the essence of life. What began as curiosity became obsession, and obsession became rupture. The consequences ripple outward still, touching laboratories, hospitals, and the dreams of those who dared approach death as data. The unsettling truth is this: Edmund Blackwood may not be a relic of history. He may be a presence that moves quietly alongside our progress, shaping it, guiding it, and feeding from it. His story reminds us that some doors, once opened, can never be shut again. And behind those doors may lie not only the answers we seek, but the questions we were never meant to ask.